Welcome. Today we're at the Queensland Museum and we're visiting the Sea Monsters Prehistoric Ocean Predator exhibit. This has been designed by the Maritime Museum down in Sydney in Australia. So this is an Australian exhibit that is probably going to tour the world, but at the moment it's at the Queensland Museum. And I will say that the Queensland Museum has added its own items to the end of this, and I'll point those out as we go through. Now you may notice the sound quality is far better than we normally get. I normally walk through these exhibits and do a live recording of what I'm seeing and walk you through it and talk you through it, but it's school holidays here and I got home, played the video, and the noise level of all the kids and just the background noise was so strong. It was a terrible sound quality. So I've decided, okay, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to live record my voice as I'm re-watching my video. But over the years, a lot of you people have said that you like watching these videos and you like seeing these exhibits, but you wish I'd stop. I'd stay for a little bit longer, dwell on some of the more exciting fossils that we see, which I've always pointed out, that's what a pause button is for. But taking that on board, what I'm going to try and do is I'll take photos of these exhibits as I go through as well. I'll drop in some photos, some closer photos, so you get a much better view of some of the more important fossils. And stay tuned at the end. I'm going to just dump a whole bunch of the photos of the fossils, so nice close-up so you can see some of the features that we're talking about, bite marks and things like that. Hopefully this might be, if this goes well, I might do it this way in the future. I might use my live recording as just a base for me to use until I get home and record it this way, and we'll see how we go. All right, so here we are, as I said, at the Queensland Museum. Now, it's a temporary exhibit, so as we turn around, you'll see we are above the normal dinosaur hall there, which is called the Lost Continent. And I say dinosaur, it's actually got a lot of megafauna from Australia as well. The world famous Queensland Museum stuff, we've got some of the more famous dinosaurs like Minmi, or at the bottom, up the back you can see Mutabarosaurus, but I've done a video about that. I'll talk about that later. I will say, while I was doing this, I met one of the Queensland Museum designers and she gave me a couple of notes, which I'll point out as we go. So here we are entering the exhibit. It is a very well made exhibit. They spent a lot of money on this and high quality images as you go around. Obviously the monster of Maastricht, that's a famous fossil, one of the first fossils ever discovered, telling us that there used to be these giant creatures around. And of course we have the fish in fish fossil, Zipcanthus. And I know I've said that wrong, so please don't bother telling me. I can never get it correct. Now, I do like this exhibit, this ring effect, that you get to walk around one of the major sized fossils. This is an ichthyosaur called Shonosaurus, probably the biggest, one of the whale sized ichthyosaurs, which is an incredible specimen. You may notice a lot of this is casts, and that's pretty much true of most traveling exhibits these days. But I do like that you can travel around and it actually opens up the floor space. You get to have a lot more people looking at the one exhibit at the same time. And as you can see, you can actually add a lot more specimens in front of the big exhibit so that a lot more people are seeing a lot more things. And I quite like that. That's quite clever. Normally they're up against a wall, so you're only getting half the floor space that you could use in such an exhibit. But the other problem is, you notice there's not a lot along the walls, because then that would really create choke points. I love that little fossil showing you how the hand works compared to the flipper, and that they're pretty much the same bones. So the next we walk into the Urumanga Sea. Now, what is the Urumanga Sea? Well, during the Cretaceous, most of middle Australia, and I will say most of Queensland running down to South Australia, was an inland sea called the Urumanga Sea, and that's named after the Urumanga Basin, which is a very large, very dry area today where a lot of cattle farming and mineral exploration goes. And it's also the source of most of the world's opal. Something like 90% of opal comes from the area that used to be the Urumanga Sea, and in fact, opal is pretty much the Urumanga Sea. This inland sea became landlocked as it evaporated. All those minerals that were in the water condensed, and eventually those minerals and what water left started to sink through the earth, and wherever they discovered cavities, wherever it discovered fossils, it would give them a coating of this rich mineral substance, and that is the opal. So Urumanga Sea, the Urumanga Basin, is quite important for Australia. And because it's a sea, obviously you're going to find a lot of marine fossils. And that is the gold mine here of fossils, like a lot of marine fossils. And that's why you may notice whenever you see opalized fossils, they're usually of a marine type. Occasionally you get a dinosaur, but that may be something that's been washed out to the sea or into the sea, or possibly been even eaten by a larger predator like one of these marine reptiles that we're about to see. So the Urumanga Sea, and that led its name to Urumangasaurus, and Urumangasaurus is your typical elasmosaur. Now, as we go through, you will notice that there are some fossils here, and a lot of these fossils that are kind of talking about the Australian area are actually from New Zealand. Not a lot of these fossils have been found in Australia of this sort of type, and very good ones have been found in New Zealand. And also it's a nice way of like showing how New Zealand used to be connected to this part of the world, or it is part of this world, you know what I mean. Anyway, Urumangasaurus. Now this skeleton is actually Elasmosaurus. They haven't found a complete Urumangasaurus, but they have found a quite little remarkable fossil. It's a skull, and this skull shows clear bite marks, predation, and those teeth, the bite marks, really do look like they've come from Kronosaurus, and we'll talk about Kronosaurus in a minute as we see it. But yeah, this amazing fossil with the bite marks on the back, and I might add a picture here to show the fossil bite mark. So quite exciting. Very rarely do you find predation on fossils, and when you do, it's pretty interesting news. It's showing behavior of another species and interactions with other species as well. Now, as we travel along, we are of course under COVID rules, so everybody's trying to keep their distance. We do come down to Kronosaurus, which is probably the king of all Australian fossils. The original Kronosaurus was found in the middle of Queensland. It's currently on display, I believe, at Harvard. I want to say Harvard Museum. If I'm wrong, I'll put a note right here. And I actually got to see it. And this is an amazing fossil. This is probably Australia's greatest fossil, and almost no Australians know about it because it's not held in Australia. It's held over in the US. So, you know, it'd be nice if it maybe did a tour coming back to Australia at some point. Hint, hint, hint. I'm not saying that out loud. And some of this material is real, and it is on loan from the Queensland Museum, or the Queensland Museum has added it to their display. Now here we have Penny the Plesiosaur. Lots of plesiosaurs are found in Australia. They're found all the way from Queensland all the way down to South Australia. There's quite a few of them have opalized. In fact, Australia has a habit of naming our species like this. So here's Penny, but the most famous one is Eric the Plesiosaur or Plesiosaur. And that one I remember when I was a kid. It was opalized, and there was a good chance that it was going to be sold at auction and sold overseas. It wouldn't actually remain in Australia. So Kellogg's, I remember Kellogg's Cornflake asking for donations for money to try and build up a bit of a war chest, so when it came to auction the fossil could be bought and remain in Australia. And I do believe Eric is on display at the Australian Museum in Sydney. Though there's actually quite a few opalized plesiosaurs now, or pliosaurs. There's one at the Opal Museum in Sydney. There's an Opal Museum in Melbourne. I know there's one there. I've also seen one in South Australia. So I'm saying these things as I'm hopefully putting up pictures of these fossils in other locations. But as far as I recall, Eric is at the Australian Museum in Sydney. So very famous fossil. And you know, these are actually quite similar to, I've seen at the National Dinosaur Museum where I worked, we have a specimen that from Morocco, which is very similar to this one. So these are kind of standard body pliosaur that was getting around the world. But yeah, and this is on loan from Kronosaurus Corner up in the central Queensland, where a lot of these fossils around that area have been found. And they do a lot of work looking out for these sorts of fossils. So very cool stuff. And here we have a real piece of Kronosaurus. I've actually seen a lot of the Kronosaurus material out at Queensland Museum, especially at the back of the annex, and here I've just popped up my thumb so you can see the size of Kronosaurus, especially the teeth compared to a human thumb. And as some of you know, I am not a small human being, so that is a big tooth because that was a big thumb. I love that puzzle. What a clever idea to build your own plesiosaur. Now here we have mosasaurs. Mosasaurs, the great mosasaur, the very last marine species predators to evolve. They pretty much took over from everything else and lasted for a very short time right at the very end of the Cretaceous. And what's so special about them? Well, very few have been found in Australia. I know a couple have been found, and when I say a couple, I mean small pieces of mosasaurs have been found over in Western Australia. We've never found a complete skull as far as I know, or any kind of complete specimen. So it's fragmentary remains, but they did live all over the world, and that just proves that they lived here. In fact, once again, we return to our friends down in New Zealand. We've got the Kiwi specimens here, and I believe that's a skull from a Kiwi specimen on display. So mosasaurs, they were here, but again, we're thanking our bros over in New Zealand for allowing us to display their fossils, because they do find a lot of marine fossils in New Zealand. Moving on, as we travel, we are now entering the turtle exhibit. And when I first passed through this, I kind of just filmed it and walked through going, oh, that's interesting, turtles, sea turtles, yeah, that's great. Oh, Archelon, he's great. North American, the biggest turtle that ever lived. Interesting stuff. Just filmed it, moved on. Didn't really know much about sea turtles, never been a big study of sea turtles. I've had to talk about sea turtles maybe once in my life. But then I came back and kind of went, well, these are Australian specimens. I should kind of have a look again. And what I uncovered was quite amazing. I was not aware of this. For example, we are, of course, talking about the Urumanga Sea again, the Urumanga Basin, and a lot of these Australian fossils were found there. They were living inside this warm interior ocean that dominated most of Central Australia. So, pretty important for Australian fossils, but then I discovered that there was one, and I've written this down because I can never remember its name. We are talking about Cratochelaurid. No, I got that wrong. Anyway, one of the fossils that they found in this Urumanga Basin was gigantic, as in the size of Archelon. Now, they haven't found much of it. In fact, they keep hoping they find more, but it is a very rare fossil for that region. They do find quite a few turtles, because turtles obviously love those warmer inland seas, nice shallow, and in fact, most of the fossils there show that these turtles were not a deep diving turtle, that they were swimming at the surface, probably eating jellyfish and things like that. Anyway, this fossil, very rare, but the pieces that they have are easily the equal of Archelon. So this is a gigantic turtle. Was not aware of this. And what they're thinking is it's not really from the area, that it's a deep ocean turtle, as in it's traveling the Paleotethys or whatever those seas were that were off the Cretaceous at that time. Mostly staying in, but perhaps coming inshore to these narrower, shallower, warmer waters to eventually find beaches there and lay their eggs. So this was a visitor to the area, probably not living in the area all the time. Yet, what an amazing fossil to discover. Had no idea that thing existed. It's quite amazing. And I will promise to stop saying amazing. So, pretty important fossils. And the other thing I discovered was that for a time, these gigantic turtles, they probably didn't have shells on their backs. A lot of them they would have had, and we can kind of see the Archelon, it had like a scaffolding of shell, but it didn't have a complete carapace. That these turtles were more likely leatherbacks, that they had backs very similar to leatherbacks, which led to the idea that the giant leatherback turtle was the only surviving member of this group. But recently that's come under review, and then it became like the closest living relative of these giant turtles. And then they realized that, well, it's not actually that closely related. It's more closely related to the modern sea turtles. In fact, the modern leatherback turtle is not part of the modern family of sea turtles. It's its own species. There were a few of them. It's the only surviving member, which to me kind of suggests that it's back to being the closest living relative of these giant Cretaceous turtles, because even though it's not part of that group, it would have split off between this group and the modern sea turtle, which means at some point in time, if you're looking at like a cladogram, it's in between. So that makes it the closest living relative. Amazing that this the modern leather sea turtle is a living fossil, basically. It's a survivor of the Cretaceous and this ancient group that no longer exists except for this one single specimen. Yes, so I found that interesting. So, moving along, here we go to Megalodon. How can you have a giant sea predators display and not have Megalodon teeth? And yes, quite a few Megalodon teeth have been discovered in Australia. Now, not only Megalodon, some of the more closely related species, almost equal in size, have also been found here. So you can't have a predatory thing about Megalodon, but so much is talked about Megalodon. Let's not talk about it anymore, except that, yes, fossils have been found, especially around Victoria. Moving along, one of my favourite fossils, and I'm so glad I saw this. And again, a lot of these are replicas. So here we have the giant fossil tooth. Now this is of course a cast of the enormous whale tooth that was discovered down in Victoria, I think 2016. Closely related to the enormous sperm whale relative Leviathan, obviously named after the Moby Dick whale. These were big. These were up to like 70 feet long. These were very large whales, predatory whales. And look at the size of that tooth. That's a giant tooth. You know, look at that size of that tooth compared to that little girl. And I've never seen one. This is kind of exciting for me that I get to see something I've never seen. Even though it's a cast, who cares? I got to see one, got to put my hand next to it. That's a big tooth. And One of the things I was a little bit disappointed with was that there wasn't more about whales here. Whales are one of the major fossil groups discovered in Australia, especially along the Victorian coast, New South Wales, Western Australia, South Australia, and Tasmania. Let's not forget Tasmania. In fact, yeah, I've got a piece coming out about the Tasmanian fossils soon, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, like some amazing fossils were found here, shark-toothed whales and things like that, and they're an important part of the Australians' paleo history. And here was an opportunity to kind of present that story that not many people know about. And yes, this is an amazing tooth and it's a great tooth, but I just feel they could have done a little bit more with that. But, you know, you get what you can get. Moving along, we leave this area, and this video is quite interesting, and I didn't get much of the video because I actually filmed the video by itself, but I will point out at this point that this is a very clever video. The more I watched it, the more I realized it's quite clever, because as you can kind of see, floating in the water is I guess Americans would call it a cooler. We call it an Esky, one of those famous things where it's named after a brand name, Esky. Basically, you know, the thing you keep your drinks cold in. And why I like it is this thing's floating along and it's interacting with all these species. You see killer whales, you see pliosaurs, you see elasmosaurs, you see ichthyosaurs. And cleverly, it gives you an idea of scale. Not only does it show you how each species moved and how differently they move to each other, but it gives you an idea of scale. And to me, that is quite clever, because you're not going to have somebody in scuba gear out there with them. That's hard to do. But just by having something everybody's got in their garage and having all these species interact with it, it kind of shows you how big these things were, or sometimes how small, but how big these things were, like Kronosaurus, as we see Kronosaurus swimming through. Yeah, it's quite clever. The more I thought about it, the more I went, I'll pay that. That's very clever. Then we leave the video. Now, as I said, I did interact with some of the curators of the Queensland Museum, and they told me that, yes, they've added, one of the questions I did ask them was how much was added from the Queensland Museum. I noticed a lot of these specimens I had either seen previously out at the Queensland Museum Annex, like the Kronosaurus jaw we saw earlier, and I realised, well, that they're not really attached to the Maritime Museum in Sydney, so have they loaned them, or is this part of something they've kind of value added, that they've got the travelling exhibit and then they've added a couple of their own things to it? And it seems like it was the latter, that yes, they did help out somewhat with the designing of the exhibit, and I believe one of their staff paleontologists was actually the force behind this and helped design most of it, but they did add a few things at the end for themselves just to add a Queensland flavour to it. And we of course have the famous Scott Hucknall, Young Australian of the Year a couple of years ago. Scott Hucknall, you'll often see, he does a lot of videos from the Queensland Museum showing their exhibit over at National Fossil Day and National Dinosaur Day for Australia, you know, especially last year. Scott was kind enough to do a couple of little videos that he shared with us, showing some of the specimens on display that they hold there. So, no, Scott's a great guy, and if you ever get a chance to meet him or have a chat to him, or, you know, send him an email or whatever, you know, he's a very friendly guy and he'll generally try and help out where he can. So yeah, so this is quite clever, showing you a bit about the Queensland Museum's interaction with these fossils and how they've gone out to the Urumanga Basin to find these fossils, and gives you an idea of some of the locations that they're finding at, and it kind of shows you how dry Australia is. Some of these images at the back, which kind of explains why we find them. If you're walking around this big, barren dirt, no grass, very few plants, all the rocks look exactly the same, and then suddenly something of a different colour is standing out, makes it a bit easy to find these fossils. So the problem though is that Australia's a big place and there's not many of us, and there's not that many people out there looking for this stuff, but I'm sure it's just all lying around out there, and this proves it, that, you know, if you just walk around and put eyes on the ground, you are going to find this stuff. So yeah, nice little display, and there's a great image of the barren landscape that is a lot of Central Australia. Now, as we go through, you get a nice little video of Urumanga Sea there, interactive video. And speaking of interactive, I only quickly glanced over this the first time I went through. I was showing you that there's this nice little video on the wall of all these mosasaurs swimming around, all these kids doing little hands-on activities, colouring in pages and things like that. And of course, we always end with a shop, and it was a quite good shop actually. We bought a couple of things in there. But then I had a second look at what these kids were doing, and I have done another video which I'm going to drop in here, and hopefully I've dropped it in, that shows you exactly what is going on. This is amazing. What a clever idea. What the Queensland Museum has designed is this colouring in table where kids are getting pictures of various mosasaurs, it looks like, Maybe they changed it every day. I don't know if it's just mosasaurs. It'd be cool if they did ichthyosaurs and then elasmosaurs and things like that, Kronosaurus at some point. But it's clearly mosasaurs today. So they're colouring in their own mosasaur. They get a picture of a mosasaur, they colour it in whichever way they want, they put their name on it. And then, this is the clever part, they go over to the corner and you can see the kids standing there doing it, scanning their pictures in. And that scanner will add that picture to the video program playing on the wall, and eventually they will see their own mosasaur swimming across the screen, and it joins all their brothers and sisters and everybody else visiting at the time, their mosasaurs. What a clever idea. You know, and you can see, look how busy it is. You know, we've moved through and it was quite a busy display, but look how packed this part of the museum is. Kids are clearly loving doing this, and the excitement of seeing your own artwork of this ancient prehistoric creature swimming across, and I'm sure parents are videoing it and they'll have that forever. So passing on the image, something that will be held forever by this family, will be seen by all their friends and families. What a clever PR thing as well. It's now spreading the word about the Queensland Museum's display and how clever it is. I love it. I think that's brilliant. Hopefully a lot more museums will do something similar, but I've never seen that in any other museum. It may be at other museums. I've never seen it. So this is the first time I've seen it, and I think that is a very clever thing to do. All right. I think we're about done. I'll start adding some photos here. At this point, they'll start popping up. I'll try and keep them in order as we walk through so you can get a closer look at some of these specimens. As I said, a lot of you overseas may not have seen these specimens because a lot of them are from Australia, are from the Queensland Museum, are from our buddies over in New Zealand. So you may not have seen these in any museum near you. So yeah, it's a nice way of showing the display. So please let me know. I'm going to obviously share this on a lot of platforms and on our Facebook page at the Prehistoric Times and the Bizarre Natural History of Australia and Bone Rooms. I am a very busy person at the moment, but probably put it at the Bizarre Natural History of Australia. So please drop us a line. Tell us if you like this format, if you want us to do or want me to do this in the future. I kind of like it and I kind of don't. Like, I love the live interaction and it really keeps me on my toes. I got to literally talk about what I'm seeing, and that's got to be stuff in my head. So hopefully you realize I do know a little bit about this stuff, but this is also a nice way of doing it. I can stop, I can actually research something that I don't know about and add that to it, and now I sound a lot smarter because now I'm talking about something that I didn't know about before, such as those turtles. I was very pleased to discover that information about the turtles. That was great. So I'm enjoying it because I learn a little bit more as well, and as I said, I get to add a few more videos and pictures. Now I'm going to go and edit this thing, and that will also tell me if this is worthwhile doing, because I have no idea how much trouble this is going to be to edit and put in pictures. So we'll see how we go. All right, anyway, thank you very much, and I shall talk to you on the next video.